All right, so drones, right? They're everywhere now. You see them taking pictures, you see them delivering packages. I mean, they're everywhere. But figuring out the FAA's rules for these things feels like you're trying to, dodge them in the air.
Yeah, for sure.
Luckily, you've come to the right place because today we're going deep into the FAA's Advisory Circular 107-2. We're going to try to break down these drone regulations, specifically Part 107.
Yeah, this document is definitely key to understanding what's going on in the drone world. I mean, there's a lot of technical jargon in there, so we're here to kind of try to decode it all.
Absolutely. So let's start with this. Did you know that there's actually a weight limit for these things? 55 pounds, that's what the FAA says?
Yeah.
That's a lot heavier than I would thought. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The FAA actually distinguishes between what's called a model aircraft and a small unmanned aircraft. Why does that even matter?
Well, it's all in how they're defined in the regulations. For a model aircraft, there's 3 criteria. 1, it has to be used strictly for recreational purposes, so things just like weekend flying at the park, maybe taking some pictures, just casual stuff, nothing commercial about it.
So I can film my dog catching a Frisbee, we're good.
Exactly. 2, it has to be flown within community-based safety guidelines. So this is where organizations, for example, the Academy of Model Aeronautics or the AMA come in. They kind of set the standard for responsible flying, make sure everyone's staying safe.
So it's kind of like they have their own little club and they have their own rules, but those rules are there for a reason. It's all about safety.
Precisely. And they provide, like guidelines, best practices, all that good stuff. And then finally, the weight limit applies there too. It can't exceed 55 pounds.
Okay, so we've got model aircraft down, but then there's this whole other thing, Small Unmanned Aircraft System, or sUAS as they call it, which sounds incredibly technical.
Yeah, it can be. But just think of it this way. Imagine a remote control car, but swap the car for a drone. That control link between the controller in your hand and that device, that's what makes it an sUAS. So the FAA defines it as a small unmanned aircraft and its associated elements, which, includes those control links, the software, everything.
Okay, so it's not just the drone, it's the entire system that goes into flying it.
Yeah.
So just like you can't have your remote control car without the car and the remote, that connection is essential.
Absolutely.
That control is key.
Right. Someone's got to be behind the wheel, so to speak. Which brings us to a question I'm sure a lot of you are wondering about.
Do I, the listener at home, actually need a license to fly my drone? Like, that's the big question, right? Everyone wants to know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a popular one.
And I'm guessing the answer is, it depends.
It does. It always depends, doesn't it? With the FAA, it depends. In this case, it depends on how you're planning on using that drone. So for instance, let's say you're a real estate agent and you want to get those amazing aerial shots of a property to help sell it. Well, that, my friend, is commercial use. You're going to need a remote pilot certificate for that. But if you're just out having fun, getting some cool shots of the neighborhood, catching the sunset, putting it on social media, that kind of thing, well, that falls under recreational and you're good to go, no certificate needed.
So it's not about the drone itself. It's really about how you're using it. What happens if, let's say, I'm just out flying for fun, right? And I get this incredible footage, just amazing stuff. And out of the blue, somebody says, hey, I want to buy that footage from you. I've gone from, casual drone pilot to selling my stuff.
Yeah.
That line between recreational and commercial can get blurry really quick.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important point because it's easy to sort of accidentally drift into that commercial territory without realizing it. That's why it's so important to understand these regulations. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
Oh, 100%, especially when we're dealing with something like drones. But let's talk about, I hate to say it, but crashes happen. Even if you're the best pilot in the world, things happen. And the FAA has specific rules about reporting those drone mishaps, particularly if somebody gets injured or some property gets damaged. So what should we be aware of there?
Well, you're right. Accidents are a reality. So the FAA wants to be in the loop when it comes to serious incidents. And they basically have 2 main thresholds, serious injury and property damage. Now, a serious injury, that might seem straightforward, but the FAA actually gets pretty specific. They reference something called the Abbreviated Injury Scale. Have you heard of that?
I can't say that I have.
It's also known as AIS, and it's used by medical professionals to assess injuries. So if an injury is a level 3 or higher on that scale, it needs to be reported.
So if I trip over my drone during takeoff and break my wrist, but it heals perfectly, that still needs to be reported because it met that AIS criteria at the time.
That's exactly right. It's not about the long-term effects of the injury, but that initial severity based on that scale. Think broken bones, deep cuts that need stitches, head injuries that require hospitalization, even if the person makes a full recovery.
Wow. Okay. That's serious stuff. But it makes sense. The FAA needs to track that information. Now, what about the property damage side of things? I imagine a runaway drone could do some serious damage.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to property damage, the FAA is looking at anything beyond just damage to the drone itself. So if the cost to repair or replace that property is more than $500, you got to report it.
So let's say my drone goes rogue and takes out my neighbor's prize-winning rose bushes.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking like award-winning roses here.
Mm.
Replacing those is going to be pricey. That's a reportable situation.
That's right. It all comes down to the cost of making things right. Either you're repairing the damage or replacing what was lost. And the FAA is pretty broad in their definition of property. We're talking fences, buildings, cars, even power lines.
I'm starting to see why understanding these details is so important. Okay, so we know that serious injury and property damage are important, but what about the report itself? What does the FAA actually want to know if we have to file one of these reports?
It's kind of like a little accident report card for your drone. There are 9 main things they want to know. First off, your name and how to get in touch with you.
Makes sense.
Then, if you have one, your FAA Airman Certificate number.
Oh, right.
And of course, if your drone needs to be registered, they'll want that registration number too.
Wait, hold on. Drones need registration numbers now.
They do. That's a whole other can of worms we can open up another time.
Right.
But yeah, sometimes they need to be registered. Anyway, back to the report. They'll also need to know when and where this whole thing went down, the time it happened, if anyone got hurt, what got busted up, and of course you need to tell them the whole story of what happened.
So no, just sending a quick text that says, "My bad, drone crashed." They want the details.
It's exactly. They need enough information to really understand what happened and figure out if there are any bigger issues to look into. And you only have 10 days to file this report, so don't drag your feet.
Okay, so no need to find a carrier pigeon to deliver this to the FAA headquarters, right? How do you actually send in this report?
The FAA is pretty modern about it. You have options. You can do it all online, reach out to one of their regional operations centers, or get in touch with a flight standards district office. Point is, there are ways to get it done, but you gotta know where to go.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here today. We tackled those head-scratching terms, model aircraft and sUAS, figured out who needs to get a license and what to do if things go sideways and you have an accident. One thing's for sure, the FAA takes these drone regulations seriously.
Oh yeah, they're not messing around. And it's all about keeping everyone safe, but also trying to keep up with all the incredible advancements happening with drones. It seems like things are changing every day, so these regulations are constantly evolving just to keep pace.
Which brings up a really interesting question for all of you listening. How do you think these rules and regulations are going to change as drones become even more common? What kind of things do you think we'll need to figure out? It's definitely something to think about because drones are popping up everywhere and impacting so many parts of our lives.
It's a really exciting time to be a part of this whole drone world. I mean, the possibilities are mind-blowing when you really think about it. Drones delivering things to people in remote places, helping out after natural disasters, even keeping an eye on the environment.
And that's what makes this deep dive so important. We're not just talking about boring old rules here. We're talking about understanding how they impact this amazing world of drone technology and how it's changing the world around us. Thanks for coming along on this journey into the wild world of drone regulations. And until next time, fly safe out there.